This video contains spoilers for the Odyssey. Hello, stranger. You have eyes of Athena. Ho ho ho. My favorite part of the Odyssey is when Odysseus says it's time for Odysseying and sails off into the distance on his Viking boat. Yes, Vikings will also be the part of this discussion because IMAX cameras aren't the only thing Christopher Nolan likes to destroy. I decided to make this video a complete summary of everything I think about the Odyssey, including my thoughts on the cast and all the drama I stumbled across while browsing internet. And trust me, there's quite a lot of it, so let's get into it. I went to see Nolan's The Odyssey without having read the book and with a healthy amount of suspended disbelief. In other words, like your average American moviegoer. With that mindset, the film is actually pretty enjoyable. It's basically a Marvel-style adventure movie set in ancient Greece, and if that description alone sounds appealing to you, you'll probably leave the theater satisfied. But I feel sorry for the people who call it a masterpiece because that's a very difficult position to defend. The movie opens with a banquet scene where Travis Scott plays a bard. According to Nolan, rap is the modern equivalent of oral poetry, the form of storytelling that dominated ancient Greece. That single creative decision perfectly summarizes the entire movie. This isn't meant to be the Odyssey, it's a film merely inspired by the Odyssey, filtered through an American lens. Take these Travis Scott lyrics for example. Jacques turn la flame, now he rolling on an addy, 50 on a chain, another 50 on a caddy. Oh, he might pop him a pill, pop him a seal, pop anyone, pop anything to find that Ali. Yeah, to find that Ali. Yeah, definitely a very similar storytelling tradition. And that's exactly how the entire story is treated, earning points with the kind of audience that puts politics above everything else. Nothing has to make sense, nothing has to stay faithful to either the original work or even the historical period it's set in, as long as it checks the right boxes. Nearly every element of the story that I genuinely liked was either copied directly from the Odyssey, like Odysseus' bow, or executed worse than in the source material. The journey home, the titular Odyssey, plays out like a slasher movie where every island is its own standalone mini-story. That's when I started feeling slightly disappointed because it seemed like something was missing. I expected Odysseus to learn a lesson from each adventure, something that would help him overcome the next challenge. And later I looked it up. Unsurprisingly, that's exactly how it works in the original book. For example, after escaping the Cyclops' cave, Odysseus gives the Cyclops his real name in a moment of arrogance, which ultimately becomes the reason he and his crew cannot find the way home. 20 years later, when he finally returns to Ithaca disguised as a beggar, he notices his old frail dog Argos. The dog recognizes his master and begins wagging his tail, but he's too weak to move. Odysseus is almost certain nobody will recognize him, yet he still avoids acknowledging the dog, wiping away the tear so he doesn't risk exposing himself. In Nolan's movie, he just walks up straight to the dog like, "Who's a good boy?" Apparently there was simply no room in Nolan's Odyssey for such a powerful and emotional scene. And there are many worldview-driven changes like this throughout the film. Take Helen of Troy for example, who's from Sparta, and as we all know, Spartans were historically black.
Somebody get these beggars out of here!
Some people defend the casting by arguing that the Odyssey is mythology and fiction anyway, so they could have cast a goat in the role and it wouldn't matter. Others desperately try to argue that it's historically plausible for Helen of Troy to have had that skin color. So just make up your mind, will ya? But what confuses me even more is this. You have the most beautiful woman in the world, the woman whose beauty launched 1,000 ships, and then you give her an identical twin sister. So does that mean that 2,000 ships get launched now? I always thought that being the most beautiful woman in the world means there's nobody else like you, not that you literally have a twin who looks exactly the same. It's like that picture of Daniel and picture of the cooler Daniel, especially since in Nolan's version Helen has scars from her abusive white Greek husband, so I guess that makes her sister the new most beautiful woman in the world. It's such a stupid writing decision that I genuinely believe Nolan himself came up with it. We wrap up the story with the final battle on Ithaca, a scene that actually made me laugh out loud because it looked like vampire survivors. You know, more and more weapons keep flying into the room, swords, shields, spears, everything Odysseus and his enemies used during the fight just magically appears. How can you write something that unbelievably dumb? Especially with all the extras running around in the background not knowing what to do. And the best thing is, then Odysseus walks over to Penelope with a spear sticking out beneath his ribs. Yet the very next scene he suddenly has a bandage around his neck and everything is perfectly fine. The only thing missing was him pouring healing liquid over his hand like Ethan from Resident Evil Village. But even though Odyssey is often described as a very masculine story, women will supposedly find something for themselves here too. For example, when Circe turns men back from pigs into humans, she says, "Return to your disguise." Huh? Get it? Get it? Because we, men, are actually pigs. And being human is just a disguise for us. Wow, what a progressive story. Then there is Calypso, who literally essayed Odysseus in the original myth, and here she's portrayed primarily as someone deeply concerned about his well-being, because of course she is. Every possible opportunity was taken to reshape this adaptation so it reflects the creator's own beliefs. And naturally, there had to be an anti-war message. Racked with guilt, Odysseus sees Athena take the form of a woman who was killed during the fall of Troy, whereas, from what I found, in the original book Odysseus meets the spirit of Agamemnon and is actually proud of what the Greeks accomplished at Troy. But hey, that kind of moral wouldn't appeal to all the people with flags in their social media usernames, so it had to be rewritten into something more modern. Despite all that, I wasn't bored for a single minute during the 3-hour runtime, and the fact that I hadn't read the book definitely helped my enjoyment. On the surface level, Nolan's The Odyssey is an entertaining spectacle that actually makes you want to watch it again. The biggest standouts are the people working behind the scenes, especially Ludwig Göransson, whose score is incredibly catchy, particularly the Sirens theme, and I loved how he incorporated the sounds of Odysseus' bow into the music itself. Many of the shots are wallpaper worthy, although some people criticize how grey Nolan's version of Greece looks. I wouldn't call this film a masterpiece, but it's definitely better than Tenet. With all the movies in the world, this movie is one of them. Now that we've finished talking about the story, let's see how the actors performed in their roles. Some of my opinions might be a little controversial, but let's get into it. Matt Damon as Odysseus is extremely convincing and is probably one of my favorite performances in the entire film. The same goes to Anne Hathaway, although I do miss the days when veneers and Botox weren't quite so common in Hollywood. Throughout almost the entire movie I hated the idea of Zendaya playing Athena, maybe because I hate Zendaya, but by the end I actually changed my mind. I think she was fine after all. As for Tom Holland, I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like Nolan deliberately decided to make him an idiot, and succeeded. Every time he sees a beggar he tells him, "You have wise eyes." The eyes of Athena. Charlize Theron as Calypso was bland and forgettable. I think they could have cast someone else entirely, or maybe just simply because the character has absolutely no personality and exists only to motivate Odysseus to continue reminiscing about his past. But even much better casting choice would be that Calypso from Pirates of the Caribbean. That would be so interesting to see. As for Lupita as Helen of Troy, we already covered her role, but it's also worth mentioning that one interview where the actress couldn't name a single mythical creature and instead just made this weird emoji as if she is from Fortnite. She and John Bernthal were a perfect match because for some reason his performance also completely put me off. Maybe it's because while playing Menelaos, he behaved like the Punisher the entire time. The funniest part is that while preparing for the role, Bernthal completely stopped talking to anyone. And one day when he was in a restaurant with Tom Holland, this happened.
And one day we were in a restaurant and he had salmon. And he said to me, he wrote down, "Can you ask for some lemon for my salmon?"
I like lemon on my salmon,
listen,
bro.
we all do.
Fuck, and that's all they had, there was salmon. Yeah, anyway.
So the lady, I said, "Excuse me, can I have some lemon, please, for his salmon?" Maybe she misheard me or something. So she came and brought this lemon and dropped it in his drink, in his water, and then immediately he was like, "All right, fuck it, I'm talking again."
I respect the dedication, but the performance still ended up being pretty mediocre. Agamemnon, played by Benny Safdie, admitted himself that 99% of his job consisted of what people call aura farming, basically just looking cool on camera. And to be fair, he succeeded, aside from the transition from wearing enormous black armor to suddenly having surprisingly skinny shoulders underneath. But you could probably assume that was intentional. Now we get to the controversial part, because I actually liked both Sinan and Eurylochus. I have no idea how faithful they were to the original book, but the performances were strong enough that my suspension of disbelief still worked. What I absolutely cannot understand though is casting Will John Lee as the Greek warrior. Either it was a desperate attempt to squeeze more representation into the movie, or Nolan is secretly racist because the warrior is literally the only one who gets dragged into the water by the sirens. Then there's Scylla. Every single piece of concept art I've seen depicts her looking far better than Nolan's version, as if Nolan watched The Love Sausage from The Boys and thought, yep, that's the kind of monster I want in this movie. The cast was overflowing with famous names, but the downside is that most of them barely had enough screen time to leave much of an impression. And that still wasn't the end of the controversies surrounding this film. One interesting thing about modern film productions is that cultural representation only seems to matter when the culture belongs to specific groups that are popular in the United States. That's why the Odyssey's promotional world tour deliberately skipped Greece, because they knew perfectly well that this movie has very little to do with Greece itself. Many people defend this decision by saying it's just an adaptation, so it doesn't have to stay faithful to the original. But that's exactly where suspension of belief comes into play. If you're setting a film in a specific world and a specific period, you should at least make sure the changes are logically justified. Because if nothing really matters, then why didn't Nolan throw Palestinian flags into Troy, or give the Cyclops a wizard hat, or hand Odysseus a Glock so he could simply shoot the guy trying to woo his wife? You ignore one thing, then another, and eventually the entire story stops making sense. At that point, it might as well take place in New York City. Everyone would still be wearing the exact same ancient Greek outfits, but instead of wandering through the Cyclops cave, they'd be walking through Manhattan and sailing down the Hudson River. It would even save money on production because, after all, it's just an adaptation. And speaking of production, Nolan rented Viking ships for the movie, and several of them were damaged during filming. According to the owner, the non-profit organization Vikingaleden, Universal Studios still hadn't paid the $6,000 in damages. There was also a controversy surrounding the costumes. While preparing the Odyssey, Nolan contacted Dimitrios Katsikis because he wanted historically accurate armor. Then he completely ghosted this guy and replaced realism with Marvel-style fantasy armor instead. The drama didn't end after the movie premiered either. Once the Odyssey hit theaters, Rotten Tomatoes filled up with critic and audience reviews, and the film quickly climbed to impressive scores, currently sitting at 94 from critics and 97 from audiences. It looks like this movie is a masterpiece. I mean, the only better movie than this is Paddington 2. Sounds incredible, right? Well, not exactly. One Twitter user shared their experience and several others confirmed it. Their 2.5-star reviews were rejected by Rotten Tomatoes, while glowing 5 out of 5 reviews praising the Odyssey were approved without any issues. But it's not the first case like this, because something very similar happened on IMDb in the past. More negative reviews weren't being approved, while perfect 10 out of 10 scores had no trouble appearing on the site. Of course, none of that stopped people from claiming that the Odyssey is a masterpiece that triumphed over an imaginary boycott that never even existed. Overall, Nolan's The Odyssey is a pretty solid blockbuster that offers a little more than your average big-budget action movie. Best parts come from the original source material, even though it has been heavily rewritten, and part of it comes from the talented people who worked on the production, making it an entertaining watch that never really becomes boring or too cringe. I think the film will appeal most to people who know absolutely nothing about the Odyssey. The more I learn about the original work, the more my excitement is replaced by disappointment. Ironically, the woman who translated the Odyssey, whose translation Nolan supposedly used while working on the screenplay, seems to share my opinion. She called the screenplay awful and said she'd be embarrassed to write something like this. At the same time, she admitted that her teenage children had a great time watching the movie. The success of the Odyssey could end up being a Trojan horse for art itself, a quiet approval of rewriting the myths and the histories of different cultures into an Americanized version of them, where rap is considered the highest form of oral storytelling and the vampire regis is black. Maybe if Netflix's Black Cleopatra has been released after Odyssey, it would have received just as many defenders and supporters as Helen of Troy did. The only thing we can really hope for is that people making movies for modern audiences either run out of money to produce these films or run out of classic works they can reshape to better fit their own beliefs and ideology. I'm curious what you think. What kind of cultural impact do you think Odyssey will have, and what are your thoughts on all the controversies surrounding it? As always, the comments are yours, but the likes are mine, so leave one under my video. Thank you all for watching, I'll see you in the next video, take care, bye bye.